What you are about to see here is a compilation of videos documenting and explaining how Konami has implemented anti-consumer policies and outright scams to take as much money from the consumer as possible. These videos are taken from a wide period of time and have a wide variety of example cases. In parts, these will be updated and expanded upon to reflect the current environment of Yu-Gi-Oh! However, I will be leaving in a lot of these older examples to help show that this isn't a temporary scenario, or that this is a trend that Konami can suddenly do better at one month compared to another. This is a constant cycle that Konami uses to generate cheap revenue at the expense of consumers. This is a history split into three main parts: terrible product structure, upshifting and quality control, and finally a segment on what players can do about it. Along the way, we'll cover a variety of other problems such as short printing, deck build packs, and staple cards being cut from TCG products. I hope Konami hears these complaints and takes actions to change them. Let's get into Yu-Gi-Oh! I could overlook a lot of the problems in Yu-Gi-Oh! If the game wasn't so expensive, but the high price tag just makes everything about Yu-Gi-Oh! Strained. I would put the price as the main reason as to why the card game is so slow at getting new players. Very few people can afford it. Every new staple card is about $100 each, and that's just not okay. If I didn't know any better, I'd say Konami hated poor people. Now, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but price is such a problem. To put it in perspective, I recently bought a full competitive Warhammer 40k team, the mini tabletop war game that's notorious for being expensive, all for less than what a meta Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck would cost me. And that's including the paints and paintbrushes I had to buy to get into the hobby. Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently has been overtaking Modern Magic in prices, and what's scary about that is that every one of these expensive Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards has been printed in the past 2 or 3 years. Now you might say that Yu-Gi-Oh!'s pricing issue is fine because you can just resell them, but Konami's reprint policy turns cards into ticking time bombs of lost money. Konami's process is to print overpriced, often short-printed, meta-relevant cards, then for at least a year, these will remain out of reach of the average person, being meta staples. Think Meta Zodiacs, the Dogmatica engine, every new pot card, etc. This ruins the ability to play for most people. Then they will reprint the cards into the ground for 1 or 2 sets. Once these cards have been completely milk dry of their ability to sell a set, Konami will power creep or just outright ban them. There's a reason ban lists come very quickly after a Mega 10. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Has an expensive card problem, but let's get into why. It starts from the Konami box structure and what you actually get out of buying boxes. A box is a collection of card packs that you open for a random chance at obtaining cards. Typically, a box has some preset guarantees of what you'll get out of them, or at least a rough ratio. Yu-Gi-Oh! Boxes in particular have a few reasons as to why the cards out of them are so expensive. First off, there's almost no alternate arts like there are in other card games. Alt arts help control the more expensive price of what would be collector's cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! Only does basically impossible to get alternate rares, which doesn't really help the issue. Secondly, Yu-Gi-Oh! Will short print cards in side sets. This should be an illegal practice, but I'll get into that later. Third and most importantly is the all for secret rare to box ratio when compared to every other card game. In Yu-Gi-Oh! When you buy a sealed box of packs, you're averaging 2 to 3 secret rares and 6 to 8 ultras for a price that starts around $60. There are about 10 secrets to pull from. In Magic the Gathering, you're guaranteed about 4 to 5 mythics, and a rare in every pack. These go for about $91, with 15 mythics to pull from. Vanguard boxes go for $45 to $55, with about 4 triple rares guaranteed. These boxes have 5 triple rares to pull from, and about 15 double rares. For Digimon, there are 10 SR per set, and 2 SEC per set is usually average. Boxes go for $80 MSRP, but stores will sell them for as low as $65. We can take that the average cost to get a secret rare in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going to be about $30 in boxes. This is about $10 over the Magic Gathering average. So the Yu-Gi-Oh! Box structure is the most costly and expensive in the TCG marketplace if you're looking for the highest rarity of cards. And it really only comes close to Magic. But Magic has a few things that keep the price down. First is the draft format, which is a format all around building decks based on cards pulled from packs, and it helps keep the card supply high. More packs open means more cards to sell, which means more sellers and lower prices. Yu-Gi-Oh! Used to have a draft format called Battle Packs, but Konami discontinued it after failing to support it. Second, Magic has alt arts as before mentioned. Third, Magic has different types of every booster set, where different ratios are used to determine pools. This leaves Yu-Gi-Oh! In being the worst card game for straight up buying product if you actually want cards. Just a reminder, in Yu-Gi-Oh! There's no guarantee of pulling any secret rares at all, although that's anything but impossible. What if I told you that boxes have something else dragging down the value and keeping up the price of secret rares? That's right, it's dead secret rares. Not every secret rare in a set is good. In fact, we can break down almost every main Yu-Gi-Oh! Set into the same rough breakdown of 1 to 3 high-value secret rares, 2 to 6 middle-price secret rares, And lastly, 1 to 3 abysmally bad secret rares. The expensive cards typically will immediately make back the price of the box itself, while the bad secret rares will have little to no worth. In my favorite example, on one hand we have D-Boys, and on the other hand we have a Volzor Dolkia. While this isn't a problem when buying massive amounts of boxes, the small scale variability means buying boxes isn't reliable for casual players or people who just want to pick up a box for fun. And the worst part is, it doesn't even have to be this way. OCG boxes are structured very differently. Instead of having 8 or 10 cards locked only in the secret rare slots, every secret rare card is also available in the super rare slot, with the secret rare and collector's rare being upgrades. This means the average price of Yu-Gi-Oh cards is ridiculously lower in the OCG. Not only that, it makes the average pack have a lot more value. Konami is actively scamming America and Europe because we're suckers and won't do anything. Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck build packs are the biggest scam out of every Konami product currently being offered. What should be a good way to pull cards to build 3 fun archetypes has been destroyed by the practices of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. To start off, pull ratios for these sets are terrible. Every box contains about 3 ultra rares and retails for around $60 to $80. Assuming the most common price of $65, the average cost to pull an ultra rare is about $22. Compounding this price per ultra rare is the fact that there are 10 different ultra rares to pull from. There are a few ways to visualize what this does to the consumer. First, assuming every box contains exactly what you need, it would take a minimum of 10 boxes, or more accurately, about a $700 case, to get what you need. We can also compare the bottom end of ultra rares to the top. In Tactical Masters, the bottom 5 ultra rares are all worth less than $5 around the time of release, and the top 5 ultra rares range from $15 to $40, also around the time of release. This is a very common trend for these type of packs, with a similar distribution happening for Amazing Defenders. This all creates an environment where a small buyer or consumer can't reliably buy product and get their money back. From a larger reseller perspective, the boxes are only able to break even thanks to the few collector's rares pulled from cases. Sometimes, this results in a singles price being favorable to a consumer, like with the Rescue Aces, closer to Amazing Defender's release. But on the other hand, it also contributes to the higher cards being priced as what they are, as it becomes sustainable for big-ticket consumers. This terrible pull rate is in direct contrast to OCG boxes, which have a pull rate of about 1 ultra rare per box at around, get this, $20 to $35 per box. However, these boxes only have 3 ultra rares to pull from, and have most of their cards available at super rare. This does technically leave the ultra rare price at still around $22, but since there's less ultra rares to pull from, it ends up making decks significantly cheaper. Instead of having to pay around $200 for 3 different price sets of ultra rares to complete a purely core, you'd only have to pay around $60 for that in the OCG. For those of you who want higher rarities, the OCG has you covered here too. The ultra rares also come in secret, and all the commons come in parallel rare. Now, you do technically get more packs per box in the TCG, but that's only because the TCG packs have more filler rares to devalue potential single pack openings. TCG boxes are a $20 product bloated to $60 solely just to rip more money from the consumer. Alright, so the packs are not great in the TCG, but there used to be a much better version of the product. Old deck builder packs, like the Secret Forces and Dark Saviors, used to be all foil sets. And this was a unique TCG gimmick. Packs would have 4 super rares and 1 secret rare, making most cards easily obtainable for the consumer. Now, if you're watching this from the compilation, you already know why this product had issues. For those of you who don't, this line of all-foil deck packs were almost always short-printed, meaning some cards were significantly harder to obtain from packs than other cards. This would usually be not aligned with the advertised ratios of boxes, and if it was, it would only be technically correct in an evil contract with the devil sort of way. This would lead to several cards fetching hundreds of dollars, and unsurprisingly, this soured what would have been the best series of sets ever in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. But it continues to get worse. Seeing no pushback to these sets, Konami has decided to upshift the rarity of potentially popular archetypes in the most recent releases. Wild Survivors, the newest set, has seen the entire portion of the competitively played Vanquisher Soul deck upshifted to ultra rare from the much more balanced OCG distribution. That's 7 ultra rare cards out of the 10 different ultra rares to pull from. Remember, you only get 3 of them per box. This is by far the most blatant and scummy move Konami has made in recent years, and it's slowly moving them closer to competing with Wizards of the Coast for anti-consumer policies. So the secret rare printing issue creates some expensive chase cards. But surely all these cards are only archetypal boss monsters and unique text, right? They wouldn't print borderline competitively required cards in secret rare, would they? Well, That's where the $300 deck price minimum comes into play. Every deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Needs some sort of secret rare staple to play at an optimal level, be it a hand trap like Ash Blossom, a blowout like Forbidden Droplets, or a consistency booster like whatever the new pot card is. These cards are one of the biggest ways modern decks facilitate interacting with the opponent. And adding this up, it means you end up with a game where 90% of the decks need to spend money on a few expensive chase cards to even be able to keep up with the locals. The least expensive option is the hand trap package, where 12 hand traps will run you about $150, depending. But running this by itself is becoming decreasingly popular in the metagame. An anti-hand trap package will cost a bit more, around $200. 3 Forbidden Droplets is a fat $270. A playset of Pot of Prosperity is a whopping $390. What makes these staples hurt so much is that they aren't even the deck itself. It's not your $300 Adventure Engine, it's not a $400 Sword Soul Core, it's the bare minimum that's needed to engage in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Be it Fluffles or Despia, it doesn't matter. You need these cards, and the tournament results overwhelmingly show this, as we can see from the results of YCS Guadalajara and YCS Charlotte. This trend has continued into 2023 with cards like Chaos Angel, Triple Tactics Thrust, Kurikara, Baron de Fleur, Excel Synchron, and somehow still Divine Arsenal Zeus and Pot of Prosperity. Hopefully the reprints will help with Divine Arsenal Zeus, but who knows. The newer trend with staples is to have them be a bit more specific, yet still very needed for the decks they function in. Labyrinth decks with Chaos Angel have a significantly higher conversion rates than those that don't. And everyone knows that Super Heavy Samurai decks struggle without Baron de Fleur and Excel Synchron, as these cards have become a key part of the deck's combos. You still need these expensive cards to win, and even a year later after the original video, this is still true. This chapter gets to a more difficult topic in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community. That is intentional power creep and planned obsolescence. With new strategies like Branded and Splight, the game is in the middle of another massive push for power creep. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Is always in the state of power creep and new meta decks. This is just how Konami and a lot of other card games justify selling new sets. It might not seem like a big problem, as Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a relatively massive set of decks that perform well, but let's put this into perspective with just how many meta and relevant decks there have been over the years that have been power crept. Let me show you the complete tier list of Yu-Gi-Oh! Sorry for showing a bit of a blurred image. This list is for a series I also do on this channel. We rank every deck. I don't really want to let you guys see this all yet, but I'm going to show a few highlights. Now we can look at the 5 or so decks at the top of the list, and the 30 so below it as being relevant. But if we look at the wide variety of decks at lower tier, we can see all the previously expensive decks that are not relevant either through power creep or the ban list. Cosmos used to be an entire meta deck with Dark Destroyer fetching $150 each on the market. Now the deck struggles compared to anything. Burning Abyss used to be extremely meta-defining and relevant long-term, but over the years it has been forced lower and lower on the tier list, and now only works with the brand new Phantom Knight engines and Branded. It also doesn't quite work with the older BA cards in the way you'd want it to. Look at Gladiator Beast. They're at full power, and they don't even touch the metagame. I picked some older examples, but the same is true with newer decks like Dogmatica. If power creep doesn't sell new relevant cards, the ban list certainly will. While power creep is more of a slow pushing force, the ban list is a hammer actively smashing down on people to get new decks. At Emancipator, Tri-Brigade, Drytron, Lyrilusk, Infernoble Knights, Trickstar, and Lunalights, just to name a few decks from more recent history that have been actively taken away from players to push them on to buying new strategies. A ban list, of course, needs to exist, especially in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh!, but Konami is clearly using it to push new products instead of just to balance the game and get rid of problematic strategies. This is why most cards never get hit until after they get a second printing or the main set is mostly out of print. I talked about the post-Megaton ban list, but we can also see examples like Prank Kids Meow Mew, which is now safe to hit after it got reprinted in Maximum Gold Eldorado. I get new cards need to sit in the format for some time before they get banned, and you gotta print new cards to make money. But I feel like this method rips more money out of the consumer hands through anti-consumer means. I personally feel it's dishonest, but spending $1,000 on a deck just to have it get banned or power crept 6 months to a year later is the standard in Yu-Gi-Oh!, so what can anyone really do about it? We can even tie the rarities of cards printed to the ban list. The newest Super Heavy Samurai support was printed at low rarities, making the engine extremely affordable for players. In the June 2023 ban list, the strategy would receive a ban in the form of Super Heavy Samurai Scarecrow. This ban would take place 3 weeks after the newest support was released. Of course, this is one of the quickest examples of Konami addressing a problem interaction ever. It's almost unheard of, perhaps because these cards were printed at super rare and common. There were other hits on the same ban list, of course, purely Mathmech and Naturia being the most heavily hit decks, while decks like Kashtira and Sprite would not be hit as hard. The more expensive cards destined for a reprint would receive lighter hits on the ban list, while those that were out of print or printed at low rarities would be hit more severely. Almost as if Konami was balancing maintaining a player base with a fun format and maximizing profits. What makes this ban list even more funny is at the same time Sky Striker cards were taken off the ban list to coincide with the release of new Sky Striker support in upcoming sets, all while keeping other cards of lesser or equal power level on the ban list like Orcust Harp Horror and Thunder Dragon Colossus. I'm not mad at the unlimits to Sky Striker, but they're only giving the deck power it should have had earlier, only to boost profits and not to balance the game. Well, box ratio and power creep are a problem, but it's a good thing it can't get worse, right? Well, Konami also happens to engage in one of the most atrocious policies I've ever seen. It's called short printing. So when you open a box of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, there's supposed to be a set chance of pulling a card at a certain rarity. Like if you'd open up a pack of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, you should have an even chance of seeing each secret rare. Short printing is the concept of having cards be underrepresented and harder to pull out of packs. Now, this is supposed to happen due to the natural printing process, or at least it should. But when we look at Konami, only the most important cards in a set ever seem to be short printed. There are quite a few examples throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history of short-printed cards, such as Dark Arm Dragon or Vanity's Emptiness. But in its modern form, it really started quite famously with Necros Abrainak in 2016, who instead of being pulled at a rate of 1 per box, got short-printed into only 1 of every case. This made Necros Abrainak a $150 card, and made the format unaffordable. And to add insult to injury, the Secret Forces, the pack this archetype is from, was one of the best-selling Yu-Gi-Oh sets at the time. This trend continues, but there are a few highlights. Eldritch the Golden Lord was short-printed in Secret Slayers, leaving him a $150 card on release. Sky Striker Mobilize Engage was short-printed in Dark Saviors, letting the card hit over $100 on release. The problem got so bad that Konami publicly announced that they have stopped short-printing cards in main sets. But if you notice, the 3 examples previously mentioned were from side sets. So this is still very much an ongoing problem, although most recently Konami has refrained from overly short-printing cards in the new Ghosts from the Past and in Grand Creators. Now, I mentioned this was border illegal line in the chapter title. Why is that? Well, it's about gambling law and loot boxes. Well, it's no secret that trading card games operate on a very similar level to loot boxes and straight-up gambling. It is to such a point that most trading card companies will never outright mention the secondary market. In recent years, many countries such as Belgium and the Netherlands have taken increasingly strict legal policies against loot boxes. And while these don't apply to card games as they are right now, the reasoning behind their legislation is shockingly close to the situation Yu-Gi-Oh's put into. In 2018, the Netherlands Gaming Association conducted a study that concluded video games with loot boxes violated Netherlands gambling law under the reasoning that the content of these loot boxes is determined by chance and that the prizes to be won can be traded outside of the game. The prizes have a market value. This sounds shockingly similar to the trading card game market. Change one word in a sentence to trading card boxes and you're there. One half step many companies do to halfway compensate for loot boxes is by disclosing the odds of pulling a particular item. This is where short printing really messes up transparency, as there's no way for a player to know pull ratios before someone somewhere buys a lot of product. Honestly, I personally feel like short printing is awful, misleading, and just anti-consumer. But it's not illegal as it stands right now. I just worry that as trading card games make more and more money, someone in government will take an interest and pass some regulation. Honestly, anti-consumer is just how I would describe Konami's whole business model. The game for the most part is good, it's just not easy to get cards, especially in the current economy. There are 2 things you're never supposed to say if you work at a trading card company. First, it's that you can't ever acknowledge the secondary market, and if you do, you can't say that you're manipulating the prices. Second, you can never acknowledge the gambling aspect of the product, or say that the players might have an addiction. These issues, hidden under a layer of obscurity from the general public, form the bedrock of how companies like Konami, Wizards of the Coast, and Bandai skirt gambling law and continue to market their product to kids, addicted adults, and uncaring consumers alike. On top of this, each of these companies engage in their own terrible policies to milk as much money from the consumers as possible. As we all know by now, Konami has a very bad track record all around, but in today's discussion, we will be dealing specifically with their handling of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. The company's policies result in insane price gouging for its Western audience, as well as the lowest standard in card quality among any major brand. Not only that, current tournament results show that this insane price gouging is still a problem, with the most popular competitive deck, Kashtira, fetching an eye-gouging price tag of around $900 to $1,200. Compared to my last video about this subject, the reasons are a bit different and more nuanced. While there's still the terrible secret rare pull rates, and of course, ban list shenanigans to drive new set sales, This particular wave of problems calls on a much more direct line of action by Konami. That's increasing cards in rarity, removing high-value cards from structure decks and reprint sets, and to top it all off, dramatically lowering card and print quality in the TCG to save a few quick bucks. The most common thing Konami will do to wring more money from its English audience is to increase the overall rarity of cards released. For the most recent release of Kashtira, Konami upshifted the following cards. Kashtira Theosis was a common in Japan, but a secret in the TCG. The field spell Pressure Planet Wraith Soul was moved up from a rare to a secret. Kashtira Riseheart was moved up from an ultra to a secret. Tearlament Kashtira was moved up from a common to an ultra. Kashtira Riseheart was moved up from a super to an ultra. This is the main reason Kashtira is so expensive in the TCG, despite being cents in the OCG. Cards that should have been available as commons have been upshifted to secret rares to milk the customer base dry. The currently $80 secret rare staple, Triple Tactics Thrust, was only a rare in the OCG. This is a modern example, but historically this trend was very common. Breakers of Shadow saw Solemn Strike upgraded from super rare to secret rare. The new Challenger saw the entire Cleafort archetype moved up several rarities. Disc from super to secret, Cleafort Scout from rare to ultra rare, and lastly Carrier and Helix from common to super rares. Power of the Elements saw Sprite Blue moved up from super rare to secret rare. Sprite Starter moved from rare to ultra rare, and Primeval Planet Perlino moved from rare to secret rare. There are many different cases of this throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history. However, one thing remains constant, and it's that consumers are hurt by the company's greed every single time. Now, what's more upsetting, it's not like this in the OCG. This is entirely done to prey on a market they think they can get away with. And they probably will. Oh, this is a depressing script. If you ever wanted to feel like Seto Kaiba and have one of only a few copies of a super meta-relevant card, Konami has you covered, with exclusive tournament rare cards. Sometimes Konami will take a card released in Japan, and then instead of releasing in a set like usual, the card will be given out as a prize card for tournament winners. Unlike the match winner cards that say they can't be used in a duel, these cards are fully tournament legal. This is admittedly a more minor section that isn't super relevant at the moment, with the most recent prize card being a generic normal dragon monster. However, I feel like it should be mentioned because it's a pointlessly stupid policy. Usually it isn't a problem, but on occasion it annihilates a potential strategy's accessibility. The two biggest examples of this are with the cards number 106 Giant Hand and Minerva the Exalted Lightsworn. Giant Hand was released as a YCS prize card in 2013. As it was a generic monster negate on a rank 4 body, it was an extremely popular and strong choice in decks. It even featured in Corey McDuffle's first place 2015 North American Championship famous hat deck list. In hat format, the card would fetch around $400 to $500, but it would slowly creep up in price till it was around $1,200 before it would be reprinted. The card would be reprinted in Premium Gold Infinite Gold in 2016, just in time to terrorize players in Pepe. Minerva is a much more depressing case. Did you know that in 2016-2017, Lightsworns were an extremely viable meta deck with one of the highest top cut conversion rates ever in Yu-Gi-Oh history? Paired with a variety of outside engines like zombies, performages, and of course Brilliant Fusion, the deck could make insane plays, like easily making 3 Cyframe Omega and looping away the opponent's hand, or a ton of other negates and disruptions. However, the deck would only be usable by a select few people who had access to the Lightsworn prize card, Minerva the Exalted Lightsworn, as it was one of the best methods in the game at the time of milling cards and getting draw power at the same time. If you couldn't afford the $500 card, you couldn't play the deck, and the deck was extremely good. With a small collection of the same few people, running from event to event, collecting free wins from an option literally unobtainable by other players. What makes this even worse is the deck actually wanted to run 2 copies of Minerva for an optimized strategy. This would last until the card would be reprinted in 2017, unfortunately causing the card to have 2 fewer years of relevancy before it would be power crept out of the game by faster strategies. Supporting Konami's batshit anti-consumer rarity system is a continued trend of cutting cards out of Western releases of product. Cards that were available to be obtained in Japan would be replaced by a less expensive and less used cards in the TCG release. Here we have a breakdown of cut cards in TCG structure decks over the past 10 years. Looking at this list of cut cards, a majority of recent structure decks have had cards cut, with a few notable exceptions. Looking at the entire list, we can see that even decks where nothing was cut out had no meaningful reprints anyway. Only 2 structure decks out of the 31 counted here had better value than their OCG counterpart, those being the Zombie structure deck and the Lightsworn structure deck. Despite how overall quality all these structure decks might seem, once put into context, we can see just how much the Western audience is missing out on. Why would Konami do something like this? The reason is simple: marketing and greed. At its most basic level, expensive chase cards sell sets. Magic the Gathering uses big expensive cards like Force of Will, Jace the Mind Sculptor, and Mana Crypt to market sets, putting these cards in their trailers, and then later letting people share their pools online or amongst friends to drive word-of-mouth marketing. However, each reprint lowers the market value of cards, as well as how much players care about these cards being included in the set. Of course, this drives up the elephant in the room of modern card game design. Is a trading card game an actual game, or is it just an investment? This question has proven to be surprisingly hard to answer, with companies like Magic trying to straddle the line, satisfying no one in the process, and some companies like Force of Will taking the hard game stance and going completely bankrupt. With this question, Yu-Gi-Oh! Tries to have its cake and eat it too. However, reprints in Yu-Gi-Oh! Tend to affect the price of its cards more than with Magic. Mostly this is due to box price differences, but also with Magic having a larger general demand for cards, both due to their larger concentrated audience in North America, and with the more homogenized mana design. Regardless, this means that Konami ends up significantly more guarded and maintaining their chase cards' value, leaving Western products to end up being lower quality than in the OCG, where staples get reprinted constantly and in a variety of products. Who wants to buy a structure deck with 1 or 2 chase cards missing? This next section is a bit more rough. Basically, in almost every form of the word quality, Konami is screwing over the Western market. First up, the OCG just has more rarities than the TCG. As mentioned earlier, no cards are exclusive to Secret Rare. Cards are available in Supers or Ultras. This surprisingly leaves Ultra Rares to be the more expensive base rarity of cards in the OCG. What's also interesting is that in almost every pack, there are fewer Super and Ultra Rare cards than in the TCG counterparts. Let me clarify what I mean by this. In each individual set, there's a certain number of Ultra and Super Rares you can pull from, with the OCG having a more concentrated delivery of Super and Ultra Rares. All, it means it's a bit easier to get those chase cards in OCG than in TCG boxes, also meaning they put more cards at common and rare rarities than the TCG. What makes the OCG system interesting is that these Ultra and Super Rares are also available in a wide variety of higher rarities, such as Secret Rare, Prismatic Secret Rare, Starlight and Corrector's Rare, and even Ultimate Rares. Ultimate Rare cards never stopped in main sets in the OCG. Not only that, they have additional foiling on the card outside of just the texturing and the art. It's insane how much nicer OCG rarities are. Here's a side-by-side comparison of a TCG Ultimate and an OCG Ultimate. Nicer rarities aren't where this ends. OCG cards have an insanely nicer card stock. Here's a breakdown of card thickness of some popular card games. I measured these myself with a micrometer, and these are averages. By far, the thinnest cards come from the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, and the thickest come from the One Piece TCG, which is more or less close to the Digimon TCG, and also with other Bandai games. They're all pretty uniform with card thickness. It might seem like a minute difference in thickness, but it's an insane quality difference with how well these cards can resist damage. It wasn't always like this. Older Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards were once significantly thicker and had a higher quality GSM, which is a standard for measuring bendability that I wasn't able to get a machine together in time for this video to release to measure for y'all. Konami has been consistently lowering card quality like a medieval king diluting the gold from his currency and hoping no one would notice. On top of these lower standards, we have a complete degradation of Konami's quality control. Misprints have gone from a collectible rarity to an almost expected part of cracking packs. Here is a segment that is just a collection of pictures where I explain specifically what machine fucked up in the printing process. This one is obviously where the cutter just wasn't aligned or calibrated at all. Luckily, the Starlight Rare was somewhat fine as it was cut from a different sheet. This one, where the gold hot stamp is gone, it almost seems like the machine was blocked by something. It's funny, because of the misprint, these cards are no longer legal for play. This is called crimping. It's where the heat sealing used for the packs accidentally hits the card and damages the top. Here's a smaller one where the ink just didn't have the toner it needed or the right mix of colors. Here's an abysmally bad miscut. I think you now get the point of misprints. These are very common, especially with more minor miscuts. If you check out most misprint collectors groups, prices have fallen for most misprints because it's just common now. It takes something extremely bad to get attention. If you want even more examples, the 25th Anniversary Collection set featured every single 25th rare card having the language of the attribute in a foreign language. It's a small misprint overall, but it shows a complete lack of care for quality control. Here's another funny printing error called card clumping. Basically, the machine that's supposed to randomize card distribution messes up, either from a programming error or on a mechanical level. The result is something like this, where dude is able to just open an insane level of Starlight rares, while other people will get none. Remember, as in all things discussed in this video, it's not the person pulling the cards that's the problem, it's on Konami. I don't like how I have to say this, but I definitely do. Taking all of this into account, what can we gather about Konami's intentions behind this? Is it just pure greed? Perhaps some petty form of racism? Maybe it's just corporate stupidity from the Western Division. In any case, how Konami is currently operating is limiting the growth of the game. With prices as they are, it's very hard to get people playing, especially in this economy. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is only the largest it's ever been, thanks to events in the year 2020, and lockdowns forcing people to pick up new hobbies. Most of these new people got into the game thanks to online simulators like Dueling Book, EDO Pro, Nexus, and then much later, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. The point is, when the game is cheaper or even free, it's a lot easier to get people into the game and build a community. In order to push change, I'll be incredibly politically charged here. If you care about getting minorities and marginalized people into the game, don't intentionally take it out of their reach. I'm not a fan of this type of rhetoric, but it's the only language modern companies seem to respond to, so there you go. I'll end this video with an absolute classic. Here's a Konami employee's reaction to finding out a player used Dueling Book to get into the game.
So then for any of the ladies out there who think, oh, this is a daunting task, maybe card games aren't for me, this is a testament. Zoe is here. She's doing really well on the day. Do you have any words for them? Any of the ladies who say, maybe, I don't know if this is for me?
Don't be afraid to play tournaments, because I know so many ladies who play the game actually, but just on Dueling Books or...
So, Konami has been running a terrible show. They've been releasing terrible products that actively scam the consumer. Not only that, their unequal treatment of the global market is extremely infuriating and borderline racist. So, how do we actually get Konami to change? Well, to answer that, I've created a grid. Here we have a list of actions spread across the grid of how much an action hurts Konami compared to how much an action hurts local game stores. Ideally, we'd want actions that hurt Konami enough to influence change, while still keeping local game stores alive. Some actions hurt Konami less, but every action here does at some level hurt Konami's bottom line. For the love of God, buy singles. This is by far the lightest action on the grid. It stops excessive buying of boxes and limits it to just resellers and local game stores. So let's say you still want to play modern Yu-Gi-Oh! In tournaments. Well then, it does become almost impossible to not support Konami in some way. But if you have to, just buy singles. At its most basic level, this is because there's no guarantee you'll get the cards you need or even make your money back. I've said before that you need to buy a $600 case to just get the playsets you need, and that holds true today. For example, in the 2022 Mega Tins, there are 35 prismatic secret rares, but from a tin, you only get 3. Even if you buy multiple tins, that's an astronomically low chance for you to get the cards you want, especially if you want multiples. Now let's say you're buying boxes for an investment. On a small scale, this is impossible to do successfully due to the natural variations in card prices. A single box could net you a chase card, or it could net chaff and cause you to lose almost all value. Vendors only get around this by buying very large quantities of boxes to make the variations statistically unimportant. Not only that, the natural reprint cycle of Yu-Gi-Oh!, combined with how absurdly quickly the metagame changes, means that cards are a ticking time bomb of lost value. I'm not saying invest in buying 3 of whatever new chase card is in a set, but you shouldn't buy a case to get 3 copies of Triple Tactics Thrust. You should buy single cards you think you need now, or cards you might need later that are cheap now. Don't take the brunt of Konami's bad policies. Let big vendors take the risk instead. And check your local game store for their single collections. Konami gets off to people buying boxes for that addiction pool. I'm not the biggest fan of going to vendors alone, but if we go through vendors alone, less boxes will be sold overall, as cards can more efficiently get to the people who want them. Your local LGS is also a great place to look for singles. For those of you who don't know, there are a wide variety of third-party online Yu-Gi-Oh! Simulators. The most popular one, Dueling Book, runs in browser from a simple web search and lets players manually build and play decks from any format ever made. You can find Dueling Book with a simple Google search, and it's the most common Yu-Gi-Oh! Simulator used by Yu-Gi-Tubers such as Farfa, Simo, and MBT. And unlike Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, it's completely free. EDO Pro and Dueling Nexus are automatic sims, similar to Master Duel, These automate the effects of cards and are updated as cards are announced in the OCG. If you want to play Master Duel without having to deal with URs, this is my recommended place for dueling. These can also be found with a quick Google search, although you will have to do some downloads on your end. And lastly, if you have to, you can play Master Duel. It's relatively easy to succeed at the game as a free-to-play player, although this one does support Konami's bad practices. As we can see with no new secret packs for archetypes like Sword Soul, and new support for decks being locked into high rarities to get more gems from the player base. These are common free-to-play tactics and part of why I recommend trying other Yu-Gi-Oh! Simulators online. Plus, these older simulators support older formats, have complete card pools, and most importantly, don't charge money to acquire cards after a certain point. A more subtle way to screw over Konami is to play older and alternative formats. Goat, Edison, and Hat format are all amazing formats that Konami is almost completely unable to monetize. Konami's profit model is largely based around selling new cards for new meta decks, with reprint side sets every once in a while to capitalize off of how bad their first printing was. Old formats scare Konami because Konami can't sell you cards from these formats, especially not more than once. These formats are technically static, meaning one deck is enough to last you forever if you don't want to experiment. This is most likely why Konami has been so slow to support these alternative formats. There's zero value in them for Konami because cards from older formats are almost always cheap at lower rarities. Although, they usually have some great high-end versions for collectors. Old formats strike a middle ground that not a lot of options on this list can. It's also the best solution for Yu-Gi-Oh! Boomers, and just tired players in general who want the classic back-and-forth Yu-Gi-Oh! Gameplay. Playing older formats shows that players want a change in gameplay, as well as hurting Konami's bottom line. In this video's description are links to every major alternative format's Discord servers. Here you can play in tournaments, get great advice, and find a community. As usual, I recommend Hat format, since it strikes a great balance between modern archetypal Yu-Gi-Oh! And slower trap-based gameplay. Of course, other communities are great too. Edison Format is the most popular for a good reason. Perhaps the most revolutionary action you can take against Konami is to proxy cards. By using a third-party site to print reproduction or alternative art cards, we can just ignore Konami's monopoly entirely. Of course, your standard at-home printer works just as well too. I would love to give you the exact print specifications and printers used for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, but that information would be illegal to give out. But I will say it's much, much lower quality than you think, and you certainly wouldn't want that quality as a consumer. For games like Magic the Gathering's Commander format, proxying has become extremely popular and the norm, especially with Wizards of the Coast themselves promoting it. This gives all players the ability to play $1,000 Commander decks and stick to the heart of the format, just having fun and building great and interesting decks. It's the only reason formats like Vintage can stick around at all. There's no reason we can't push more for accepting proxies in Yu-Gi-Oh! With Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks regularly costing around $500+, we should normalize proxying, at least on a local or casual level. If you care about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community growing, better deck experimentation, and Konami actually getting their shit together, then proxying cards and supporting those who do is the best decision you can make. Although, beware, this can hurt local game stores that aren't okay with proxies. But any game store worth their salt will openly sell you proxies. Well, the most simple way to stop Konami's bad Yu-Gi-Oh! Policies is just to not buy cards or play Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a bit obvious, but a boycott would work if enough people got involved. However, the thing is, Konami is vulnerable in so many other forms, this isn't the only solution. But if you do want to try out some alternative games, I would recommend the Bandai suite of games. Digimon TCG, One Piece TCG, and Battle Spirit Saga are all great options. You can also look into Pokemon. You can get the 5 best decks in that game for under $350. Legends of Runeterra is a great online simulator. Back when I played regularly, I was able to consistently own every card in the game as a free-to-play player. These games I recommended all have one thing in common that Yu-Gi-Oh! Lacks. At some level, they still care about the consumer. The last important thing we can do is to make sure Konami knows how we feel, and make sure everyone else knows about how anti-consumer their actions have been. Bad word of mouth is the most dangerous thing to a lot of companies. If you tell your friends about what's going on, they will be able to make better decisions accordingly. If people see proxies being used extensively at a local game store, they will also feel encouraged to do the same. Now, don't harass anyone, but make sure the official Konami accounts are aware of how the players feel, and how their bad and anti-consumer products negatively affect the player base. If there are official surveys or community questions, let Konami know how you feel. Just be honest, and give them the interaction they desire. If you want to get people on your side, All you have to do is tell them the same common truth for a lot of players. I love Yu-Gi-Oh, but I can't play the game because the game has outpriced me. I know for a fact that a majority of Yu-Gi-Oh fans and players in the South American region have been absolutely devastated by the prices in this game, and it's killing the game's communities. It's bad even in America, where the prices are skyrocketing and this economy is not getting better. It's Konami's responsibility as a company to make sure they can maintain their customer base. All we need to do is remind them of that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.